I'd like to introduce our presenters today. Subaru Leave No Trace team members Erin Collier and Brice Esplin use their combined experience in education, stewardship, marketing, and communications to teach Leave No Trace ethics and create unique content for our online audience. They practice Leave No Trace daily as they travel and camp across the United States, educating diverse communities in responsible education techniques. So thank you to Erin and Brice for joining us today.
Wonderful. Appreciate
Awesome.
that.
Yeah, thank you, Angie. So I am the Erin half of Erin and Brice.
And I'm Brice. Nice to meet you all.
And as Angie was saying, we work for the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. Leave No Trace is a national nonprofit and really an international movement. We have sister nonprofits in different countries all across the globe. And our main mission is just providing that access to education, that opportunity, so that people can learn how to protect the places they like to get outdoors, how they can minimize their impacts, and really just how they can be more sustainable overall. We really focus on empowering people to become stewards, to become protectors of these places and become a little bit more sustainable, even in their lives at home. And as Angie was also saying, normally our job involves traveling the country full time and providing those free educational events all across the country. This year has been a little different because of COVID, as it's been for everyone. So we've been really focused on virtual education, but we're really excited to be able to talk to you all today. We have a session both today and tomorrow. Today, we're going to focus on really what Leave No Trace is, what those 7 principles are, and some ways that we teach and talk about them. And then tomorrow's session, if you're interested in joining, is going to be really about effective communication and messaging and how we can kind of use Leave No Trace to influence some visitor behavior. And before we get started, we do want to acknowledge the Indigenous communities and Native nations whose land we occupy, whose land we talk about when we're talking about wilderness or outdoor recreation. We are joining you from Reno, Nevada, which is the land of the Washoe and the Northern Paiute. We know from our opening question that we have folks joining us from all across the country. So we are going to drop a resource in the chat where you can learn more about the Indigenous communities whose land you occupy, whose land you get outdoors on. If you already know, go ahead and let us know in the chat. But we encourage you to reflect on the history of our public lands, on the relationship that we have to them. And our purpose with this acknowledgement is really just to honor the traditional ways of stewarding the land that have been practiced since time immemorial and are still practiced to this day.
Today in our workshop, we're going to cover a little bit about the ethics and impacts that we see surrounding Leave No Trace, and in relation to not only our wilderness areas, but anywhere folks get outside. We'll highlight the 7 principles and give you all a couple quick activities and just model some ways that we talk about and things we make sure to highlight whenever we're talking about Leave No Trace with those visitors. We'll also give you some resources so that you can take a lot of this information to go and learn more on your own time as well as leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions for you all as well. So beyond that, I kind of want to pose this first question to y'all, and you can answer this in the chat there. Remember, keep that chat function open. We will utilize it throughout our session today. But I would like y'all to define what you think Leave No Trace is. If you had to put a summary or define Leave No Trace in your own words, what would it be? Drop that in the chat. No wrong answers. I'm just kind of curious to see what y'all think. Yeah. What does Leave No Trace mean to you?
Yeah, let us know in the chat. How would you describe Leave No Trace, or what does that phrase mean to you? And we'll give you just a couple seconds to type that out and let us know what Leave No Trace means to you.
Wow, almost from the Wilderness Act, right? To preserve the untrammeled character of nature. Absolutely.
Yeah, we've got Ashley saying, keeping wild areas that you visit wild. Laura says, pack it in, pack it out.
Ooh, Peter, I like that. A suite of ethics, right? Ooh, that's really, really good. Absolutely.
We've got low impact choices when recreating. So yeah, these are all we've got a ton of them coming in. Leaving nature as natural as possible. Respect. I really like that, Sam. These are all pretty much along the same lines of like you all are saying, respecting, leaving these places as we find them.
So it's important to realize here that Leave No Trace, is a balancing act, a balance of humans interacting and enjoying and recreating in these areas, but not trammeling them, right? Not loving them to death, so to speak. And so it's always a balancing act of knowing where trails should be allowed and where they shouldn't, where folks cause impacts and not. And so we do that by giving folks a framework for making good decisions when they go outside. So that means that no matter where these people are getting outdoors and enjoying nature, that they have the knowledge, the skills, the techniques, maybe even the gear, so that they're going to be as minimally impactful as possible. And that's important because we go outdoors in many different areas. There's a lot of different nuance. So we're not given hard and fast rules. It is a lot more of if then statements, right? What to do if you're faced with these circumstances? What's the least impactful decision? And those are definitely, only more important in pristine areas, but they're applicable everywhere we go outside, even in our backyards as well.
And the reason why Leave No Trace is so important, why this opportunity for education is so important, is we know from research and from, I'm sure, all of your experience in your careers, that humans can have a pretty significant impact on our ecosystems through our recreation if we aren't mindful of how we're interacting with these spaces. And our research also shows that most of these impacts happen not maliciously and not intentionally, but because we are unaware, uninformed, or sometimes misinformed about how to protect these areas. So this opportunity for education is really important because it empowers people to make those minimally impactful decisions and know how to actually protect these places. So research shows that there are some broad categories of ways we can impact our ecosystems. We can impact wildlife. This is a really common impact in our wilderness areas because we are going maybe sometimes even further into the habitat of different animals. We can impact soils through soil compaction, erosion, changing the composition of soil. Vegetation can be hugely impacted by off-trail travel, by camping in undesignated or unestablished areas. We can impact our campfires can be hugely impactful through wildfires, through sterilizing the soil, through collecting debris to burn. That can cause a pretty significant impact. Cultural resources can be often permanently damaged through impacts. And while these things are often thought of as like historical resources, many of these areas are still sacred sites to many different communities and still actively used. And then our final two categories of impacts are impacts to water resources. Most of the outdoor recreation in the United States takes place along waterways because they provide a lot of unique opportunities for recreation, but we can cause really significant pollution and contamination. And while we might be able to filter those things out, the plants and animals that depend on this water don't have that opportunity. And then the last one is one that we commonly think less about, but I think you all in the wilderness space think more about this one, and that is the impact of other visitors. We can affect other people's experiences. We can impact their ability to get the benefits that they're seeking from these outdoor spaces. A lot of times that might be thinking about solitude and how many other people we see. It could be things like noise pollution, overcrowding, user conflicts. And the outdoors are for all people, and we want to preserve the experiences of everyone so that we can all get these benefits. So we're going to show you some more photos of impacts. And what I want you to do is tell me in the chat how these photos make you feel. If they make you happy and excited to go outside, or if they maybe have the opposite effect. Pete, I did notice that you said it's hard to have Zoom and the chat open. That's totally fine. You can just follow along on Zoom. But if you can, let us know how these photos make you feel in the chat. This one is pretty significantly impacted area. We've got a sad face, we've got frustrated, disappointed,
We're
bummed.
bumming. I'm bumming too. Yep.
Yeah, empathetic, lots of negative feelings. Yeah, just all the negative feelings wrapped into one.
Mad.
We've got mad.
Headbutt.
Yeah, headbutt, sad and mad. Yeah, absolutely. Here's some more photos. That one's pretty rough there with that deer being frustrated, time spent on the wrong things. Yeah, so the reason why we have emotional reactions to these photos, to these impacts, is because we all have an outdoor ethic. And our full name is not the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Rules. It is the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. We are not trying to give people rules for how to go outside. We're trying to build up our personal and our collective outdoor ethics. Our ethic is that guiding force, what we do when no one's watching, how we decide what's acceptable and unacceptable to us. And it's personal, it's unique to each individual, and it's based on your experiences, on the ways you get outside, on who taught you how to do certain things. And by learning more about our own outdoor ethic and how different impacts affect us in different ways, we can become better communicators and better equipped to reach different audiences.
So we want to tap into that a little. We want to find out what makes you mad. So y'all should have seen a poll just pop up on your screen there, and it asks you a simple question. What bothers you most? And I would like you to pick one out of those 5 options. Which of those bug you the most? Out of people getting too close to wildlife, toilet paper sticking out from underneath a rock, trash along roadways or trails, fishing line along a stream, or cave features being broken off by humans? Which one of those bug you the most? Looks like we got about half of you participating so far. That's great. We'll give it another 10 seconds and share those results real quick.
Yeah, which of these bothers you the most? Which of these upsets you the most?
Ooh.
Looks like we've got most people answering. We'll go ahead and share those results.
So our winner overwhelmingly trash along trails and roadways. And that's somewhat common because I think it's an impact we all see day in and day out, and it definitely adds up. But even some of these toilet paper sticking out from underneath a rock being second place, that's interesting and probably, due a little bit to this culture of backcountry stewardship. And the reason we're all here is, talking about wilderness. Because a lot of times when we do this game with just the general public, no one picks that one because typically poop is not an impact that, the general public deals with on a regular basis. And so that's important to realize, is that our ethics are unique and they're individual and personal, and they're very much based on our past experiences and how we've interacted with nature. And so just realizing that in our communication with folks and how we're interacting with folks is really important. And I see a few of you saying, I wish we could have selected all of them. We let you only pick one by choice, right? It's hard. You have to decide which one you actually think is worse. And that's you exploring your ethic. Mm-hmm. So realizing that we all have our own ethic as a starting point. And if we can build more and more Leave No Trace into it, and specifically if we can give our visitors the information to build more of that into their ethics, we're going to be stronger and take care of these wilderness areas more as a whole.
Yeah, and by really diving into these impacts, understanding the why behind them, we're better equipped to bring them into our ethic and understand them a little bit more.
So the reason all this matters, in short, is there's a lot of us going outside, and it's increasing year after year after year. I think one thing the pandemic taught us last year, well, one of many things, is that nature is important for our physical and our mental health. And a lot of people explored nature in new ways last year because of the pandemic. And that's great, but we want to make sure they have Leave No Trace information along with that new knowledge. So you can see here public land use in the United States. If we loop in our municipal and city parks, that is over 13 billion with a B visits to our outdoor spaces every single year. And that's why a lot of these little things really add up. Backpacking and traveling to more backcountry areas is actually up over 50% this year. And I'm sure a lot of you are feeling that pressure in the areas that you manage. But it's important to realize that as use goes up, that Leave No Trace can help people mitigate those cumulative impacts and help us protect these ecosystems for the long term. And it's important to realize that even though Leave No Trace may have started more in the backcountry, right? Our focus originally after the Wilderness Act was really giving folks those wilderness manners or those backcountry ethics. We've evolved to realize that most folks actually interact with nature in their neighborhoods, in their parks and their day use areas nearby. And so we've really concentrated a lot of our efforts in educating in those areas in hopes that when they are reached there and they go to the backcountry setting, they're prepared. They have all this baseline knowledge. And so we're by no means ignoring the backcountry, but Leave No Trace has grown to just involve a whole lot more criteria. And, we've realized that everything we do at home plays a part in nature as well, and we can totally wrap that in.
Yeah, as Brice was mentioning, Leave No Trace is constantly evolving and constantly adjusting. And one of the most important evolutions that we're currently working on is a comprehensive review and revision of all of our curriculum. So we believe that the outdoors are for all people, but in order for them to truly be a space for all people, we need to be committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion as our core values. And one of our action items within this commitment is that comprehensive revision of all of our curriculum to ensure that it is more inclusive, more relevant, and more accessible to all different types of people, all different types of ways of experiencing and connecting to nature. And this revision is currently underway. It's actually in the stage of being with an outside committee to kind of review and approve some of those adjustments. And if you're interested in learning more about our DEI action items and this curriculum review, I did just put a link to the chat where you can find out more about those things. But this is just something to be aware of that is in the pipeline and is coming down, and we'll be having those kind of revisions announced probably sometime within this year. And as we talk about reaching new people with Leave No Trace, reaching existing people with Leave No Trace, it's important when we talk to anyone about it to remember that Leave No Trace is a spectrum. So on one side, we have significant impacts. On the other side, we have few impacts, and we all fall somewhere on this spectrum. Maybe we are on that greener side because we've had a lot of opportunity for education. Maybe this is our first time hearing about Leave No Trace, and so we're a little bit further on that significant impact side. The important part isn't where we fall on this spectrum. It's that anytime we do anything to practice Leave No Trace, we're moving towards that greener side. And just like there are cumulative impacts, there can be cumulative benefits. And we don't need 100 people practicing Leave No Trace perfectly. We need thousands and thousands of people practicing it imperfectly. That's where we'll really see that change and really see that improvement in the health of our outdoor spaces. So it's not about perfection, it's about action. And we want to do the best we can as often as we can. And that's just important to remember when we're reaching out to folks and trying to educate them about Leave No Trace.
Ashley, your question led right into this next slide. A perfect segue there.
Yeah, absolutely. So one last thing we're going to mention before we dive into the 7 principles and what kind of is within Leave No Trace is that we are a research and science-based organization. So we do our own research in-house. We also partner with different universities and organizations to do research as well. It's mostly in recreation ecology, so understanding how our recreation affects ecosystems, as well as human dimensions of natural resources. So understanding kind of humans' connection to nature and how that affects behavior. This research is, again, constantly evolving, so we use it to adjust our curriculum, adjust our recommendations, but it's important to know that it exists. We will share some resources where you can dive into that research, and we'll also talk a little bit about some of these studies today because it can be a really powerful teaching tool as well.
Brian, that's a great question I just read in the chat, but if you would save that for toward the end of our session, we'll absolutely address it. But
yes.
Great thing to bring up there.
We are seeing your questions and we will have time at the end. If they're like easy to answer right then, we'll get to them. And if not, we'll make sure we save them for the end.
So all that science and research led us to the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. And these are awesome, not only because they are the basis of all of Leave No Trace's curriculum, but also because they are personal and unique, and they are an avenue for us to take charge of our own interactions with nature, right? A lot of conservation and stewardship issues feel like they need acts of Congress and millions of lobbying dollars to fulfill. But the 7 principles are something I can do every single time I go outdoors to help protect that ecosystem. And that's really empowering. And that's what we hope to get across to our visitors as well. And they can be tricky to remember. So we're going to give you all a pretty easy mnemonic to remember them by. And that's the 7 principles hand signals. And a few of you have probably seen these and remember them. But we hope you all will do them with us. We can't see any of you, so you're in a safe space. Get as crazy or as wacky as you want. But we'll absolutely do these real quick. So stretch out those fingers.
Yeah, you've probably been on your computer all day, so they need stretched out anyway. And we are going to go through the 7 principles hand signals.
Awesome. So that first principle, we're going to think about our trek, maybe take any notes we might need, and plan ahead and prepare.
Yes. Number 1, plan ahead and prepare. We're thinking things through, writing it down. We want to have a safe trip and a leave no trace trip and know how to do that before we get there.
Second principle, we take our 2, they become our legs, and we are going to travel and camp on durable surfaces.
Yes. Number 2, travel and camp on durable surfaces. This is about sticking to trails, camping in established campsites, and if we're going outside of that, knowing how to do so in the least impactful way for that ecosystem.
Third principle, we are going to dig those cat holes or maybe throw away our waste into a trash can and dispose of waste properly.
Yeah. Number 3, dispose of waste properly. Very handily, there are 3 types of waste we want to be aware of. The first is our litter. The second is our human waste. And the third is our gray water. We want to know how to dispose of those all properly because they can cause really significant contamination and pollution.
Fourth principle gets tricky. We take 2 2s and make a camera. Take only pictures, leave only footprints, and break only wind as we leave what we find.
Yeah, number 4 is to leave what we find. We want to leave the things we find in nature because they have a role to play either in the ecosystem or the story of that place. So we can still interact with our natural areas in minimally impactful ways, but for the most part, we want to take photos of those things rather than take them with us.
Our 5th principle, our hand becomes our flames here, and we're going to minimize our campfire impacts.
Yeah, number 5, minimize campfire impacts. We want to know how to have a safe fire, how to put out that fire, and be aware that we can't always have a campfire, and there are a lot of alternatives.
Our 6th principle, we're going to take 2 3s and they become our antlers, and we're going to respect wildlife.
Yeah, anytime we step out our front door, we're in an ecosystem. We are in animals' habitat, and we want to be respectful of that so that they can be safe and we can be safe.
And that final principle, we're going to wave, give a peace sign to all those other visitors out there and be considerate of those visitors.
Yeah, number 7 is be considerate of other visitors. You could also do hang loose if that's more your vibe. And we want to help everyone be able to enjoy the outdoor spaces. We want them to be inclusive, accessible. We want people to feel welcome there, and we want to preserve everyone's experience. So it really just breaks down to being kind to people that we see whenever we're in an outdoor area. And we don't have time to talk in depth about every single one of these principles today, but we are going to dive into a few that we feel like are the most relevant. And we know that probably a lot of you have experience with these principles, but we're going to mostly focus on modeling some ways that we teach and talk about them. These are all things that you are free to steal, adapt, use. That's what we want. So ask us questions and let us know if you have any ideas for how you can incorporate these things into your work.
So the first principle we're going to highlight is that second one, travel and camp on durable surfaces. And this is a really important one for our pristine or our wilderness areas, because more than other recreation, we're going to need to go off a trail or an established footprint, if there even is one, right? When we need to pump water, when we need to dig our cat holes. Sometimes that's just how you travel through the areas that we're in. And that's all right. It just means we need to have that decision-making hierarchy of what is good for our travel and what is not good for our travel on lock in these areas. And one of the things I really want to encourage folks to do with any Leave No Trace lesson is to define those tough words, right? Define those things that maybe are not immediately relevant to every type of user. I think especially, when we, work in some of these land management agencies, we can get used to our jargon and our big government words and all these acronyms and things. So really breaking things down, aim for that 7th grade word level for these folks, so that we can all be on a shared understanding for these areas. And with this principle, that is durability. And I always like to say that it's the ability of a material or a surface to withstand human trampling and maybe bounce back afterwards, and that's for an adult. If I'm talking with kids, it's going to be those strong, those really tough surfaces. So identifying what those things that we need to define are and giving that information to our visitors ahead of time is going to be really valuable in making our lesson overall more effective. And so we're going to explore that a little bit more in this game we like to call durable or not durable. So on the next slide, we're going to show you a surface, something you're likely to encounter in the outdoors. And in that chat function, I would like you all to tell me, one, whether it's a durable or a non-durable surface. And then the important part, and this should accompany any Leave No Trace lesson, anything you're teaching with Leave No Trace, the why. Why is this durable or not durable? So get that chat function ready. Our first surface is going to be rock. Durable or not durable, and then why. I want to see that why portion of it, because maybe there's some nuances, maybe there's some caveats here.
Yeah.
What do y'all think?
It's really important too, if you are actively teaching this, maybe you have a program, maybe you're leading a hike and you ask the people you're with, where do we want to step off the trail to take our break? And why do you think that? When we give people the opportunity to kind of put things in their own words, come to their own conclusions about these things, it is often a lot more powerful and a lot more memorable for them. These things are a little bit more solidified in their brains.
So Chaco said a hard, bare surface. I think that bare is a good key word there.
Yeah, we've got durable, solid foundation underneath. Durable because it is difficult to significantly damage.
Ooh, Laura, that's a good point there. Depends. Lycan.
Yeah,
keep that in mind, right?
It might come up later.
Difficult to significantly damage, right?
Yeah, we've got durable, not much vegetation to disrupt.
Durable and less sandstone care. That's a great add there.
Yeah, absolutely. It can depend on the type of rock. It can depend on if the rock is wet or dry, or if it is like this, kind of a solid foundation of rock, or just some crumbly rocks that are just going to go all over the place.
So the important lesson here, right? Rock is by and large a durable surface for us to travel on. Most rock is okay for us to travel, camp, hike on, though this is a good opportunity to acknowledge that nuance, right? To realize that the right answer in Leave No Trace is most often, it depends. Rock is generally something we can travel on unless it's wet sandstone, and maybe some other situations we want to think about. And acknowledging this nuance gives Leave No Trace power and is helpful in educating folks. So acknowledging that in your lessons is totally important.
So our next surface is lichen and moss.
I feel like there was a hint in there somewhere.
Laura might have given us a hint, but let us know if this is durable or not durable and why you think so. So in this photo, that is growing on a downed log, could be growing on a rock. But let us know if we think this is a durable or a not durable surface.
Jackie says not durable, easily disturbed.
Yeah, yes. We've got not durable, easily damaged, easily disturbed.
Delicate ecosystem.
Yeah. These things actually grow very slowly, and they are, especially lichen, they are responsible for breaking down rock over time, over a significant amount of years. But without these organisms, our rocks wouldn't really break down in the same way that they do. And that's a very necessary part of our ecosystems and our planet as a whole. So we want to make sure they have a fighting chance. We've got not durable, can be resilient depending on the situation. Yeah, absolutely. So these are not a durable surface. They can be damaged like we talked about. They are pretty fragile, and we want to try to avoid them as much as possible. When you're on a hiking trail and there's a lot of rocks kind of right along the trail, you can often look at those ones and see that all the lichens have been rubbed off. But if you look a little bit further out, they are a lot more populated with lichens just because folks are stepping on those rocks continuously. So these are an example of a non-durable surface.
All right, folks, our last surface here, living biological soil crust. Let us know, durable or non, and why. Why do you think this would be durable or not durable? No, all caps with an exclamation point.
Yeah, there might be a giant hint in the name if you're not familiar with these soil crusts, but looks like most folks are.
We got no with 4 O's. Mary Grace says, no, don't bust the crust. Takes forever to create. The magic word is living. Yes, there is a very big hint in that title, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Living organisms, Chaco says. Takes a long time to grow.
So living soil crust is definitely a no. It is a very non-durable surface. But the reason we bring this up is it's a very good opportunity for us to say that, you know, in Leave No Trace, we want to make sure we also acknowledge those specialized or localized knowledge that maybe is for an area. So, you know, cryptobiotic soil does not is not everywhere across the world. And so in the areas where it is, it's very specialized knowledge. And we want to make sure we give our visitors that specialized knowledge. That's why there's not just a general Leave No Trace rule book somewhere. It's because there's a lot of you know, differences between areas and a lot of specialized ecosystems. So whether your specialized ecosystem has soil crust or alpine vegetation, or maybe stagnant water pools or something, communicate that information to folks. They're a lot more receptive to learning about these areas and changing their behaviors once they know that specialized information.
Yeah, this is a really powerful example of folks being uninformed or misinformed. Because if you've never experienced these types of things before, you can't really know how to protect them. So that education is so crucial so that we give people the tools to protect these areas while they're visiting. And we know with this principle that surfaces are really important, but they're not the only part of travel and camp on durable surfaces. We also want to think about how we are traveling through an area, how we're utilizing that area. And most of the time, we want to concentrate our impacts. We want all of the impact, all of the foot traffic, all of the nights of camping to be concentrated on already impacted or kind of already established areas. So you can see here this photo of a trail. This is in Mount Rainier National Park. And while there is some trail braiding starting to happen down where the kids are, you can see it's widening. We've probably had some wider groups walk there, folks going around mud puddles or passing other groups. There is some damage happening, but for the most part, we can have millions of visitors to this park annually. And when they are all concentrating on that same path, the damage is going to be pretty minimal. But there are times when we need to go off trail, especially in wilderness areas. Maybe it is to go to the bathroom. Maybe it is to pump water. Or maybe we're traveling in an area where there aren't trails, places like Death Valley National Park that are mostly cross-country parks. And we want to know how to do that in the least impactful way. So in those situations, we would want to disperse our impact. This is spreading out if we're in a group. This is taking varied footpaths if we're traveling by ourselves. And when we disperse this impact, no one area is going to get that repeated footfall or those repeated nights of camping. Our research tells us that as few as 25 passes will already create a new trail. And I'm sure you all have experienced that once a new trail starts to form, people are just going to take it. They want to know where that trail goes. They want to explore it too. And before you know it, the soil is completely compacted and there is a very developed trail there. For camping, it is about 12 nights of camping annually, not consecutive nights, just 12 nights annually, which will compact the soil and push that area past its ability to easily recover. So this can happen very quickly. And that's why it's important that we help visitors understand that if it's an established area, they want to concentrate their impact. If it's a non-established area, if they're going off trail, they want to disperse that impact. And you can see an example of this in real time. We have this group who is dispersing their impact. We can't really see where they went. And when they concentrate it, they just paint a line right through this meadow. Don't worry, we did have this group go and fluff the duff or kind of fluff up that vegetation after this educational video was filmed, but it's really quickly that this happens. This is only 4 people, so it's even less than that 25 passes. And it can be really powerful to show folks what this looks like in the real world. So this is an example of this in action in Joshua Tree National Park. These are a bunch of social trails leading up to just a couple of climbing routes. And as you can see, there are some established trails that are lined with rocks, but because people are just going all over, this area is now completely bisected with trails. For wildlife, that means that they have to go through a lot of trails to get where they're going. It means that that vegetation is killed off, that soil is compacted. And if new vegetation comes in, it's likely to be invasive. So it's really important that we teach folks to stick to those trails, to find those durable surfaces, and to disperse if they're going outside of those things.
Sam, that's a good question. We can make sure our email address will be at the end of the session. Send us an email and we'll actually forward you the study that has it.
Yeah, so Sam asked, are those 25 and 12 numbers the average of different surface types of ecosystems? I believe that both of those studies were done in the Appalachian Mountains. So that is kind of that sort of specialized ecosystem, but they have been recreated in a couple other places. But yes, we can share those studies with you.
Awesome. So we're going to move along to that third principle, dispose of waste properly. And we're going to talk about a couple aspects here. Erin mentioned that those three types of waste are our trash and our litter, our human waste and our gray water. We're just going to talk about the first two briefly today. And the first part of that is our trash and our litter. And you all acknowledge that that's your most bothersome impact, at least out of that small list that we picked, right? And so it is really omnipresent in our modern world. Trash and litter is all around us, and that's unfortunate, especially when you think most of us have been taught since kindergarten not to be litter bugs and that trash is bad. But a lot of times what's missing from that lesson is the why portion of it, how long it lasts and what it affects. So we're going to explore that a little more. And our first item we're going to talk about is an orange or banana peel. So what I would like y'all to do is let me know in the chat how long you think this would take to biodegrade out in the natural ecosystem. And this is an average ecosystem. So average for the United States, and we'll see what y'all think. I got Jordan with 2 years. I got Chaka with 1 year. I got 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 20 years. We're all over as long as it needs. That's the right answer, Brian. You're never wrong there.
Yeah.
Awesome. So orange banana peels actually take up to 2 years. Up to 2 years is quite a while. And in wetter ecosystems or more humid ecosystems, it might be a little shorter. In the desert, it may be double this. And a lot of times folks leave these behind because they think they're helping wildlife. They think they're helping that ecosystem, when in actuality, it really has the opposite effect, right? Natural food trashes left behind actually really degrade wildlife's habitat, changes their behaviors. In extreme circumstances, it can really affect their hibernation, migration schedules, and their foraging behaviors. So we want to mitigate that by, breaking one of the biggest misconceptions in all of Leave No Trace, that natural trashes are okay to leave behind. It lasts a lot longer and it really affects wildlife is the short of it.
So our next piece of trash is an aluminum can. Same thing, let us know in the chat how long you think an aluminum can would take to totally break down. Aluminum cans are very often found in fire pits because a lot of times people think burning trash might be another option, but a Forest Service study burned a bunch of different common camp trash items, things like aluminum can, paper plates, that kind of stuff. And all of those items released 3 carcinogens into the air, so cancer-causing chemicals. Not really one we want to be breathing in when we're, making s'mores with our family. And aluminum cans won't burn completely, and they'll often leave droplets of aluminum and still attract wildlife. So burning is not really a great option.
I've seen 1,000, 50, never 100.
We've got a lot of 100 years in there, which y'all are right on the money. It is 80 to 100 years for an aluminum can to totally break down. And this study, again, looks at that average climate. So it can be longer in some areas, can be shorter in others. But aluminum is actually endlessly recyclable. Things like plastic can be recycled 1, maybe 2 times, and they're always downcycled. They're made into a less quality plastic item, but aluminum cans are endlessly recyclable, and it takes about 3 months for a can to be recycled and then be back on the shelf as another can. So we want to encourage folks to pack these out, to recycle them if that is accessible to them, and to make sure they're not lasting 80 to 100 years on the side of a trail somewhere.
Awesome. Our next item of litter here is a disposable diaper. Let me know, folks, how long y'all think this one would last. If you haven't noticed a trend, we are maybe slowly moving up in numbers on our trash timeline here. And if y'all are wondering, do we really find these out in nature? Yes, we totally do. Our record is actually 6 diapers in one day during a river cleanup. Not where you want those diapers either. I'm seeing forever, 100 years. 1,000. Yes, we do in all caps. I'm sure you do. Even in the most remote areas, I'm sure you see them. Absolutely. Actually, our answer is about 450 years. So this Forest Service study took these items, put them in a hyperbaric chamber, and then took carbon half-lives to estimate their time to break down. 450 years is a long time. And a lot of times these end up in the backcountry or anywhere for that matter, because folks aren't prepared to pack out that gross trash, right? Same goes with toilet paper, pads, tampons, disposable diapers. All that gross trash that you maybe don't want to just throw in your general backpack is more likely to get left behind. So we encourage folks to use something like a FOPO bag. FOPO stands for fear of packing out, similar to fear of missing out, but we want to make sure folks take their stuff out with them. It doesn't have to be high-tech solutions or expensive gear to help us minimize our impacts. A Ziploc bag wrapped in duct tape is just as good as anything else for packing out those diapers, your toilet paper, all that good stuff. Encourage folks to make and bring these. Really, Leave No Trace doesn't require $1 million to enact in your life. It can be affordable and it can be approachable for anyone.
Yeah, and the duct tape just makes it a little more private. It also makes it a little bit more durable. And when you get a Ziploc, it has a seal on it. So all of that gross trash isn't going to get in your backpack. You can pack it out, dump out that Ziploc, and reuse it as many times as you're comfortable with. But it's a really low-tech, easy way to pack out those gross items. And we do have one last piece of trash we're going to talk about. It is a plastic bottle. Go ahead and let us know your guesses. We are, as Brice said, we are going up in years. So let us know how long you think a plastic bottle will take to totally break down. We've got 1,000 years, forever, 800,
450, never does. That's the second never I've seen. Not bad.
Yeah, you might be on the right track there. Yeah, so yeah, forever breaks down into microplastics. So plastic actually lasts indefinitely. As I can't remember who said that, as Kara said, it never really goes away. It doesn't biodegrade, so it doesn't kind of break down naturally. It photodegrades, so the sun just breaks it down, and it only gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it becomes something we know as microplastics. Microplastics are very commonly associated with the ocean, but they've actually been found in most of our riverways, in our snowfall here in the Sierra where we are. In Colorado, a few years ago, they did a study where they collected rainwater, and 80% of the rainwater they collected contained microplastics. We also, as humans, ingest about a credit card worth of plastic every few weeks. So it is far-reaching, this plastic pollution. Not all of that plastic pollution is from our plastic water bottle litter. There is industrial plastics, there's microfibers from clothing, there's a lot of things contributing to this, but it's really important to be aware that when we leave these items in our outdoor spaces, that pollution is just directly in that area. So it can affect wildlife, it can pollute our streams, it can cause significant impact. So these are just some recent headlines. We'll talk more about this bear one in a little bit, but ocean plastic has become the #1 killer of marine life. We've even seen face masks and kind of some pandemic trash affecting wildlife. So all of these things have a very significant effect on our animals. Because this plastic doesn't break down, when they ingest it, because it smells like food, it doesn't break down in their system, and it can often result in the death of that animal, or they maybe get tangled in it and they aren't able to get free. So it's really important that we help visitors understand that and tell them that this is why it's so important they pack out their trash. It's not just that it looks unsightly on the side of a trail, it has far-reaching consequences as well.
Awesome. So we're going to talk briefly about going to the bathroom outside. And, from our own survey data, we know that that human waste impacts in the backcountry are one of the biggest impacts shared nationwide. And I'm sure all of you can concur with that your areas also experience these issues. And a lot of times at Leave No Trace, we find out that these impacts related to human waste happen solely because folks are embarrassed or scared to talk about how to do these things properly. And we can mitigate that as land managers by talking about it comfortably, by bringing these topics to light right away, so that there's no gray areas, so that people aren't left wondering what the proper way to dig a cat hole is. We gave them that information. So let out from the gate, talking about this comfortably, have a poop plan, encourage folks to make a poop kit. All that goes a long ways in mitigating these waste impacts that we see and that are significant. And like I said, the biggest thing you can do is encourage folks to make a poop kit. If everyone has a poop kit and carries it around in their day pack or backpacking backpack, we're going to be able to go to the restroom in just about any ecosystem. The reason I say just about any ecosystem is that WAG bag on the end allows us in those specialized areas, in river canyons, in deserts and things, to not leave any trace behind of our human waste. But our poop kit typically includes hand sanitizer, a trowel, that FOPO bag if you want, toilet paper, and our WAG bag, that portable restroom for those specialized ecosystems. The important part here is that not only are we encouraging folks to have this gear with them for their backcountry excursion, but we're also supplying it, right? If we're giving the education to have these things, we want our gateway communities to have these available, have them available in our visitor centers and gift shops, have our concessionaires have them available. All of this makes it a lot more likely that folks are going to be able to adhere to these proper waste disposal protocols and eliminate a lot of that impact that may be caused.
Yeah, I did see a question in the chat that I want to mention. Nick asked, is biodegradable toilet paper acceptable or not? So biodegradable is a very interesting term. It's kind of more of a marketing term than anything. There are so many things that are called biodegradable soap, biodegradable toilet paper, biodegradable wipes. And all that really means is that someday, eventually, those things will break down naturally. So toilet paper can be buried in your cat hole, which we'll talk about cat holes in just a moment, depending on the local guidance. It's going to be different for desert ecosystems, places where animals often dig up toilet paper, that can be a concern. And in those areas, you are often required to pack out your toilet paper. But we never want to just leave it out on the surface. It causes social impacts, it can attract wildlife, and even if it's biodegradable, it can still take a significant amount of time to break down. Toilet paper can be anywhere from a few months to a few years, depending on the environment. So it's best to pack it out, and the next best thing would be to bury it in your cat hole. But that's a really great question.
Yeah, Sarah, that's a good ad. Flushable is also a marketing term.
Yeah, exactly.
Flushable wipes don't belong in pit toilets, in our cat holes, or even at home. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
So we have our poop kit. Now we need to know how to use it. And we want to, in most environments, dig a cat hole. There are going to be places where we can't dig a cat hole, and we would want to use that WAG bag to pack out our human waste. But if we can dig a cat hole, our first step is to walk 200 feet or 70 big steps, because we don't have a tape measure with us, away from water, trails, and campsites. Our human waste has about 100 active bacteria, pathogens, and protozoa that can contaminate water, spread disease, and it can have really significant social impacts. So we want to get that 200 feet, 70 big steps away from water, trails, and campsites. The next step is going to be to find some organic soil and dig a 6 to 8 inch hole. That's usually the length of most trowels, so you can use the trowel to measure it out. And 6 to 8 inches isn't an arbitrary number. This is based in research. Some poor grad student, or actually a few grad students, had the job of burying human waste at different levels in different types of soil, digging it up periodically and finding out what layer of soil actually broke it down the fastest. So that 6 to 8 inches, that's where the most microbes are that are going to break it down the fastest. it doesn't mean that it goes away quickly. It can still be around for a few years afterwards with a lot of those pathogens still even active. So it's really important that we get that 200 feet away and that we bury it that 6 to 8 inches deep. We're then going to cover up that hole. We're going to pack out our toilet paper or bury it in the hole. We're going to disguise it so that it doesn't look like anyone was there. And the important part is that trowel should never touch poop. It's just to help us dig. And then we'd want to use our hand sanitizer afterwards so that we are safe and sanitary. And these little graphics come from one of our videos, and we have hundreds of videos showing things like how to dig a cat hole, how to use a wag bag, how to
Do your dishes in the backcountry.
Yeah, how to do your dishes. And these are free for you all to use. So put them in confirmation emails, make them required viewing before folks go out on a trip so that we're giving people these tools. And especially with things like cat holes, where poop can be a touchy topic for people, or where it's these hard skills, having a visual, actually seeing someone do it is going to be much better than just a ranger saying, yeah, bury your poop 6 to 8 inches deep. If we actually watch someone do it, it's a lot more powerful and sets people up for success.
I want to address a question I saw earlier on this slide here, right? We're looking at the overview of a cat hole, but someone asked earlier for human and pup poop.
Yes,
yes, absolutely. So dog waste actually is just as has just as much of a detriment to natural spaces. You know, think about what our dogs eat. It's processed dog food with preservatives, dyes, and other things in it.
They take medications.
Yeah, all that stuff gets passed through their waste and is not part of that ecosystem. That's the reason. Part of the reason for leash laws is that we can pick up that dog waste after. It can spread disease to other canine species, pollute water. Absolutely. And so pup waste is just as the same. If we're in a backcountry environment, a dog hole, as I like to call it, is an option as well to dispose of their waste if we're not going to pack it out.
Yeah, so it'd be the same exact thing, 6 to 8 inches deep, bury the pup's waste. They're probably not going to go squat over the hole for you, so you'd need some baggies to transport it, but that is a better way than having to, especially if it's a long trip, carry in a bunch of dog poop.
Ray, the question about urinating in the hole after to help with decomposition, that is not something we have heard of or have research on. So I'm not going to confirm nor deny that that helps in any way, but that is not part of our guidance. We actually recommend peeing on a rock or less vegetated surfaces so that salt craving animals don't actually want to dig that up or root it up. So
yeah, and for our pee, it's mostly sterile. It doesn't have all of those bacteria and pathogens. So it doesn't have the same concern for spreading disease, but it can still contaminate water because we take medications. We still have a lot of things in our bodies that are not natural to that ecosystem. So it's still a good idea to get those 70 big steps away from water sources, unless it is a really high flow waterway like the Colorado River, 200 cubic feet per second or more, and then it can kind of dilute those things. But we really want to try not to pee in water sources, still go those 70 big steps away. But that's a great question. Awesome. And we have one more principle we're going to talk about, and then we'll just have time for questions. So if you've got more questions, go ahead, you can put them in the chat and we'll get to them in just a little bit. But we do want to talk about that sixth principle, which is to respect wildlife. And this is a really important one in wilderness areas because people are likely to come into contact with animals. They're further back and they have some more responsibilities on them because they need to store their food. They need to think about their campsites and how they're leaving access for water, things like that. And there are 3 main ways that we can respect wildlife. And these are important ways that we can put into action on any trip, whether it's in the wilderness or otherwise, to respect wildlife. The first of them, and you won't have sound on this video, I'm just going to talk over it, but the first thing that we want to think about is keeping a safe distance from wildlife. We want to make sure that we aren't disturbing them or causing them to flee. And a quick way to tell if you're a safe distance is using what we call the thumb trick. You hold out your arm right in front of you, just as she's doing in the video, you make a thumbs up, and if you can cover that animal, you are probably a safe distance away. We also want to make sure we never feed wildlife. Our human food is really not good for them. And even if we're feeding them natural foods, they can start to associate humans as a food source. This can lead them to become aggressive. It can affect their health. It can bring them to areas they wouldn't naturally be, adjust their habits like migration and hibernation. So to avoid ever feeding wildlife, we need to store our food, trash, and smellables. And this is going to vary depending on the ecosystem that we're in. Maybe it's a bear can, maybe it's a Kevlar sack, maybe it's just that it's in our car or it's in a sealable tote. But we want to make sure we store our food, trash, and smellables so that animals can't access them. And we want to make sure we communicate to our visitors what wildlife they might encounter in our area and how they should store their food, trash, and smellables when they visit our wilderness area or our outdoor area. And just a couple of recaps of these. We're going to talk a little bit more about that thumb trick because I know we went over it very briefly.
So as you can see here, the thumb trick is awesome to teach to others. It's just such a quick way to know what distance is proper for your safety and for the wildlife safety. It's especially great to teach kids, as you can see here. But you can practice this at home. Stick your thumb out, cover one eye, and at arm's length, try to cover this moose. You likely can't because you're right next to your computer. So in the real life, you would want to back up from this moose, especially a moose. I'm actually more scared of moose than bears. You can't do that here, so I'll do it for you. So we would back up until you can cover that animal with your thumb. That's going to get us a pretty close distance. Honestly, with a moose, I would probably keep backing up myself, but this works for most wildlife. If it's a family of animals, maybe you want to cover that whole family, mama and cubs or something. That way, you know, we're giving them even more space since they're in a sensitive time. But this is the thumb trick, and it's a great way to teach, you know, just quickly how much distance is appropriate when we're looking at wildlife. And that doesn't mean we can't appreciate wildlife, take photos and things, but they're from that appropriate distance so that we're not invading their space or what's left of it.
We also, as we've talked about with our other principles, we always want to include the why when we're talking about Leave No Trace. Why are we asking visitors to do these things? And we'll talk more about this tomorrow if you join our session tomorrow, but there has been a lot of research that if people understand what they're being asked to do is effective, if they understand the why behind it, they're significantly more likely to do that thing. So we always want to communicate that why. And for wildlife, for respecting wildlife, it is pretty emotional and people can attach to it pretty easily. We want to make sure folks understand that this is how we keep them safe. There's also been a lot of research done that folks who maybe leave behind orange peels or sunflower seed shells often do so because they think they're helping wildlife. They think they're doing the right thing to help wildlife. And it's just that they haven't had that opportunity for education to understand that these things can actually be very harmful. So feeding wildlife, as we said, can lead to that food habituation. It can lead animals to become aggressive. It can change their habits, and often they can even stop foraging for food naturally or not teach their young to forage naturally. And we showed this headline earlier, but I think it's important to look at again. This is just from February, and last year in Colorado alone, there were 120 bears euthanized because they became food habituated due to trash. So it's really important to keep this in mind. And this is also a good example of Leave No Trace not just mattering when we're in the backcountry, it matters in our front country campsites, it matters in our communities as well, because we have wildlife in our communities and we always want to be thinking about how we can be respectful of them, how we can make sure they don't have access to our food, trash, and smellables.
So I just want to, I saw a couple questions here. I am just going to highlight one that Virginia asked. Virginia at the Hoosier National Forest, shout out to y'all. We've been there a couple times. Asking about what do we recommend for raccoons, right? A very likely bandit. And I'm thinking back to our visits to the Hoosier Forest, like the Charles Dean Wilderness there is a little further back, and there isn't necessarily a bear locker or a raccoon locker or anything for us to put our food, trash, and smellables in. I would recommend exploring things like bear cans, or in this case, mini bear cans, right?
Or a Kevlar sack is actually it's developed mostly for rodents. It's required in places like the Grand Canyon because they have a significant rodent problem. And it is chew proof, so those animals can't chew through those bags. They're lightweight, so they're a little bit easier to get compliance with, whereas bear cans can be heavier and people are maybe more resistant to them. And it's really important, as we've talked about with other things, to make sure there's access to these items. So it could be that you have a visitor center that rents these so that folks aren't expected to go spend $120 on a Kevlar sack or a bear can. They can rent it for a couple dollars a day and be able to, make the right choice, make the most leave no trace choice, and it is more accessible to them. I do think hanging food for raccoons and those kinds of critters really won't make much difference because they'll just climb up and get access to it.
So Thad asked, with the Kevlar sack, you use a scent-proof bag, correct? So honestly, scent-proof is kind of a tough thing with wildlife. Even like bear cans and things are not scent-proof. Animals can still smell the things in there. They just can't get access to that. And I believe the same goes for the Kevlar sacks.
Yeah, they just don't get that food reward. So you wouldn't want to have it directly in your campsite. You'd want to still store it away from your campsite, but animals will still come paw at them. They'll come mess with them, but they won't get that food reward. So eventually they'll just move on. And we've got a lot of questions coming in, so we are at our question portion. We do want to just give you a few resources, and then we will get into all these questions. So if you haven't put your question in the chat yet, go ahead and type it in there, and we'll very briefly share a couple of resources with you all.
So the resources will also be posted in the chat. Go ahead and copy and paste them or something if you want to save them for later, but they are all on our website, and you can email us as well if you'd like another copy of them. But our Leave No Trace activities are the pillar of our education. Leave No Trace traditionally lives in fun, interactive games and activities to teach these principles. We have books that give hundreds of activities, and there are a lot on our website as well. Erin mentioned that video library, hundreds of videos on our YouTube channel at Leave No Trace Center. Go check them out, embed them on your websites, put them in email confirmations, wherever they make sense for what you want to teach. And if you have requests, email us requests for videos in the future too. You never know what we can make.
We also have additional training. We have 2- and 5-day courses, and we have a session tomorrow where we're really going to dive into messaging, communication, how we take those 7 principles and use them to influence behavior. We did have a few questions about research into those kinds of things, which we'll talk a lot about tomorrow. So I would encourage you to join us tomorrow if you have that time slot available. We would love to see you. It's going to be the exact same time as our session was today. And we also want to share our Leave No Trace basics with you all. These are the kind of 4 most important things from Leave No Trace that we want folks to know. We created these because there has been a huge increase in new visitors to our outdoor spaces. So these are made for new visitors. They're easy to understand. They're the most important things. And we have a whole social media toolkit that is free for you all to use. And that's one of the things linked in the chat. So you can share these things, have posters of them, whatever works best for you. I also, we don't have a slide for it, but I put in those resources a Leave No Trace statistics summary. So a lot of those statistics we talked about today, it has those highlighted, and it also has the specific research study linked in there. So you can dive into that research a little more.
Awesome. So we're going to circle back to some of these questions. So I'm going to address one from Ashley. She says, how does one address trash impacts where we do not provide trash receptacles? Dumping is frequently the norm in these areas. Like to give people the benefit of the doubt, but ultimately they put it in bear boxes or anything else, right? That's a tough ask. Honestly, communicating to folks well before they get to the site that there is no trash receptacles. But that's tough to do because unless they're required to get a permit or something, that mandatory touch point may not be happening. And so that chance for education is just up in the air. It might happen, it might not. Honestly, my recommendation somewhat leans toward examine whether those areas maybe should have trash receptacles. As much as we would like to rely on folks, a lot of times they're going to show up without the trash, the gear to pack out their own trash, or they're just expecting it to be on site because so many places have it. Now, I realize in backcountry areas that may be an impossibility in things, but at least that communication up front piece, and then putting it in those locations where we can, if it's within budget and all those things, we know that that puzzle gets really complicated really quickly.
Yeah, it could also be communicating to folks where other places are that they could dispose of their trash. Maybe, maybe there is a visitor center somewhere close by that has a dumpster or something like that. Because as Brice was saying, in an ideal world, we would like people to always pack out their trash all the way home so that the burden isn't on land managers. But unless people are prepared for that before they leave their house, which we also hope they will be, but often isn't the case, they are just not set up for success. And that leads to them dumping items because they aren't prepared to pack them all the way home. So maybe providing another option of where they could take them, that might be a good alternative. So I did see another question in here about the best way to bury human waste above tree line or in an alpine zone. And alpine zones are really specialized and really fragile ecosystems. This is something where with all Leave No Trace, we really defer to local recommendations because ecosystems can vary so much, and it can depend even on the amount of use of how, if it's really high use and a really fragile area, then it's probably going to be that you need to pack that waste out because that impact is so significant. If it's really low use and a fragile area, it's still the most Leave No Trace option to pack out our human waste, but it might not be actually required. And it could be that you maybe hike down a little bit to the tree line and find an area where that organic soil exists to dig your cat hole. But really, if we can't do those key components of a cat hole, if we can't get 200 feet away from water, if we can't dig 6 to 8 inches deep in that kind of organic soil, then we're really not going to have our human waste decompose. And in these alpine areas, digging that deep and having that organic soil is going to be very tricky, and that human waste is probably going to last a significant amount of time. So the most Leave No Trace thing to do would be just to pack out our human waste or hike down to that tree line.
Mike asked a great question here. He said, it's the first time I've heard about Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. Great, that's awesome. We're happy to have you on board. What can we do to incorporate more materials on our signage and things? So a lot of you here are with federal land managers or state land management agencies. Most of those organizations we have memorandums of understanding with, and you all can utilize our resources, our principles, our language and things in very different capacities. I encourage you to, if you are one of those groups, send us an email. That's kind of what I was looking here for. Send us an email and we'll explore the length of our relationship. Like I said, most of y'all with those land management agencies, we have a relationship already, and you can utilize most of what we have. If you're with a friends group or an NGO and maybe that relationship is just starting, send us an email and we'll make sure you end up with the right people. Apologize, our dog's barking in the background.
Yeah, UPS just showed up, so the dog's going to go crazy for a second. I also would really encourage you to attend tomorrow's session, because that's the focus of what we're going to talk about is signage research, how to make sure your signage is the most effective, how to target your messaging, that kind of stuff. So I would encourage you to attend then.
Sam, to answer your question, that is our pup Bear, who's a Pyrenees.
Yeah. So very, very barky dog.
All right. So we got some more questions in here. We'll take a peek real quick.
So someone asked if there are efforts from Leave No Trace to contact large companies for corporate sponsorships, for cleanups, things like that. Yeah, we do work with different corporate sponsors. We try to make sure that we're working with companies whose practices and mission align with our own. And it is tricky because we don't want to just put our name for things so that folks can greenwash, but we also want to work with different groups because that helps us reach more people. So we do have some corporate sponsors. You can see them on our website, and we do work to do cleanups. Subaru is obviously our largest corporate sponsor, and we work with them a lot. We also work with REI to do cleanups on their REI kind of opt to act or opt outside day on Black Friday every year. So we normally have cleanups across the country then. So there are a lot of those types of initiatives. And if you're interested in getting more involved in that specifically, we have a state advocate or a lead volunteer in every state in the US, and you can get in contact with them and find out about what service work and what volunteer work is happening in your own backyard and in your own state.
Ray's question, does scheduling the trainers require funding? No, it does not. The traveling trainers programs are free and happening all around the country. We actually have 3 teams. We're not traveling necessarily at the moment quite yet, but come later this summer, that will change. And, you know, we in a normal year do over 600 free workshops all across the country. And we'd be happy to work with y'all at lnt.org/traveling teams. You can actually find the link to request a visit. We do get a lot of requests and we can't field them all. So just a small caveat, but we absolutely would love to work with you.
Yeah, and we currently are doing virtual programs, virtual trainings. So if you have volunteers you want trained, if you have staff you want trained, reach out to us, because doing things virtually means that we can do a program for, you know, Michigan in the afternoon and California in the morning, so we can be in more places at once. So I would say reach out if you're interested in virtual, because it's significantly more likely that we can work with you. I did see a question about urinating in riverways and what cubic feet per second we recommend, because there is some debate about that. Yes, we know that there's some debate about that, and I think it is one of those things that is still kind of hotly debated. There still needs to be, I think, some more research done into how fast water needs to be moving for it to actually dilute the impacts of RP, of soap, of dishwater, of things like that. And I would say if you are able to get 200 feet away from water, do it. No matter how fast the water is moving, what the cubic feet per second is, if you're able to get 200 feet away from water, it's a good idea to do so. The tricky part comes when we're in these steep river canyons and you cannot get 200 feet away from water. And our recommendation there is about 500 cubic feet per second. I think I did mistakenly say 200 cubic feet per second earlier. It is 500 cubic feet per second is usually the bar where below that you would want to still pack out that waste, because it can cause that contamination. So I hope that that helped answer your question.
Jennifer had another question. What are the steps to becoming a trainer, and does that require funding? So all of our trainer courses, both virtually and in person, are listed on that website, lnt.org. You can find where trainer courses and master educator courses are happening around you. Typically, because the trainer courses is a one-night field-based course, there is a small financial component to it, but typically it's not to make us money or anything. Obviously, as a nonprofit, it is just to cover food and overnight accommodations if you have like a group campsite or something. Typically, you know, from the trainer courses we've hosted, that cost is usually under $60 or so. But there is scholarships for both master educator and trainers that happen yearly through Leave No Trace. So, you know, if that funding is going to be a tough ask for you or your organization, encourage you to check out those scholarships when they're announced on our social channels or on our website.
Yeah, I also saw Pete in the chat say that everyone should take the online awareness training. That is a shout out. We do have, it takes about an hour, an online awareness course. It covers a lot of what we talked about today, but it will dive into those principles that we didn't have time for. So if you're interested in that, or same thing, if you want to train volunteers or new staff when they come on board, that is free. It's always there. It takes about an hour, and you even can get a little certificate afterwards if you are interested in that. That's a great way to just kind of build that foundational knowledge of Leave No Trace. So I'm still looking at questions, but we do have one more poll that we want to send out to you all, because we want to know how you're going to put this into action. So you should see the poll pop up. It asks you, how are you going to incorporate Leave No Trace? How are you going to pass it on? Will you teach someone something you learned, adjust your personal outdoor habits, or incorporate it into your work or studies? Leave No Trace doesn't go anywhere if it's just Brice and I talking to our computer about it. What really makes the difference is you all putting it into action in your work, modeling these things when you're out in our outdoor spaces, and bringing Leave No Trace home with you and seeing how you can be more sustainable in just your everyday lives. So it looks like we've got most folks answering. We'll go ahead and share those results.
Love to see that.
Yeah, it looks
That's
like
awesome.
a lot of us are going to do all of those things. So we really appreciate you spending your time with us today. We have about, I believe, 5 minutes. If
Give or
we
take,
have,
yep.
Yeah, if we have any more questions, we do want to share our email address with you. So you can reach out to us if you're having trouble finding a resource we mentioned, if you have additional questions that come up, if you want to know about getting more involved, this is our email address. It's really easy, Erin and Brice at lnt.org. Reach out to us anytime. We'd love to hear from you. And we hope that we see you tomorrow as well, so we can talk about some more ways to put these things into action in the work that you all do.
Sam, let's see your question here.
Oh, I see. So Sam says, can you talk about Leave No Trace's relatively recently developed social media guidelines? Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, we are constantly evolving, creating new resources. We've this year created COVID guidelines. I think it was 2 years ago, created those social media guidelines. We really strive to have everything that we do based in that science and research. And this is one area where research really hasn't caught up, because social media, exploded very quickly. We have some studies in the works. We've gotten funding for them and got them approved. They just haven't really launched yet, to really research how social media is affecting our outdoor spaces. Currently, all of our understanding is anecdotal evidence. It's based on land managers' experiences, things like that. So those social media guidelines are constantly evolving, but it's things like being mindful of what your photos portray. More and more people are learning about outdoor spaces and using social media kind of as a guidebook, or in place of calling the ranger station or visiting the website. So when we're posting either on our official channel or on our personal channel, we want to think about what our photos portray. We want to provide context of things. Maybe tell folks we needed a permit, or we needed to use a wag bag, or we saw this type of wildlife and this is how we protected them. When we're considering things like geotagging, we want to just be mindful of how we use geotagging. Maybe we geotag a little more broadly. So rather than this specific coordinate, it is this state park, so that folks can still find these areas. We want to be really mindful that we're not gatekeeping or hiding places from folks, because it's public land, it's here for all of us. But we also want to provide that context so that people understand how to protect that place when they visit. And then the final piece, and the most important one, I think, is that shaming is not the answer. We don't feel that shaming is an appropriate response to less than Leave No Trace behaviors or actions. Can have a really negative consequences by making people feel unwelcome or unsafe in outdoor areas, especially people who have historically been excluded from these spaces. So we can provide education, we can provide modeling, but shaming is not an appropriate response. It can have a lot of negative consequences. So we want to call people in, not call them out.
It's what Robert just said, pretty much.
Yeah, and I will, because it was brought up, I'll put a link in the chat to our social media guidelines if people are interested in reading more about them.
Laura asks, good to add your videos to our website. Yes, absolutely. We encourage it. If you're on our YouTube channel, any of the videos, there should be a button that says embed there. If you click that, you'll get a code that you can add to any website or any website based on HTML, and you should be able to utilize it for education.
Yep.
Jordan, I love the authority of the resource exclamation. We will talk at length about that tomorrow. So if you want to be in our session then, encourage you to come check it out, learn more about communication, good signage, good messaging, how we can interact with folks doing less than leave no trace behaviors in the outdoors. It's going to be a great continuation of what we learned today.
Yeah, and I would also say, just since Brice was mentioning videos, if you have anything in your area where folks reserve things on recreation.gov, put those videos in the confirmation email. We have seen huge success in areas doing that. And that is just a really passive way to educate if you already have that touch point in place. But yeah, that is our time. Thank you all so much for joining us. And we hope to see you tomorrow and see you out in our beautiful wilderness area someday.